So it is time, my friends. We're about halfway through. In fact, we're two-thirds of the way through. We're going to do today's special feature. Every Ask a CFO show has a special feature. It's not a Q&A. It's just, there's always a theme, and it's kind of weird and spooky, but that's life. Every week, it seems like multiple people ask me about a particular topic. Multiple people bring it up. And during our special feature, I'll talk about it because maybe this has something for you in your life, in your business. The topic that kept coming up this week is the idea of a default. And what I don't mean is the time saving, like, you enter in default language into your accounting system, so when you type it in, the whole thing comes out. I don't mean the time saving features of a default. What I mean is, when you're making a decision, or when things are running a certain way, things are working a certain way in your organization, not because anybody sat down with at a meeting and said, let's create how we want this thing to be. No, it just kind of started. And then it just kind of continued. And nobody's questioning it. Nobody necessarily thinks about it much. It might be working for you. It might not. It just kind of happened. And that's what I would call a default. And it's worth looking at, because if you don't know what other options are available, you could be at least wasting time and money and energy, or at most, actually doing harm. Actually actively keeping yourself from realizing your potential, actively keeping your organization from realizing its potential in the world, whether it's an impact potential, a financial potential, both. And it doesn't mean that a default is bad. It means it's worth looking at to decide consciously, am I going to stick with this thing? Or am I going to choose something else? Whatever choice you make. But now you've done it. One of my coaches, Whitney Bishop, says you do it by design, not by default. I love that, Whitney. Shout out to Whitney if you ever watch this. Yeah, do it by design, not by default. Do it because you've powerfully chosen it. This is what works for me. This is what works for my organization. For now, for forever, for whatever, you're consciously choosing it. A default may be working for you just fine. It might not be. It's worth looking at. And there are two areas in which, well, there are multiple areas, but two in particular, which I'll mention briefly, in which it came up for me this week that people in my spheres were doing something by default and not by design. And in these particular cases, it didn't work for them. One was in the area of how someone perceives what blogging is. You know what? Blogging isn't anything. It's a bunch of words, right? But aside from that, it doesn't have to mean a particular thing. You can use it in a zillion different ways. The internet is chock full of blogs, and they're all different. And a couple of people have said to me in the past week that they felt like blogs were things that you had to spend a couple of hours on and do research and cite sources. You know what? That is a valid definition of a blog. And it's not the only way that you can write a blog. What was just described, in fact, is something that I would personally call an article or a white paper. But you know what? You want to call it a blog? That's okay with me. And if that works for you, that's fine. However, if you believe that you can make a substantial impact in the world through blogging, among other things, and you're not doing that because you don't have the time for 2 to 3 hours of writing every week or every day or every month or whatever it is, and if you hate doing research so you don't do it, that's not okay with me. If you take the time to examine your default of what you think blogging is and go, well, what if it doesn't have to be this way? What if, as I'm walking along, and I'm walking outside on a beautiful day and I have some thoughts and I whip out my notebook and I end up with a paragraph, what if then I just scan that paragraph? Or what if I type it in and start sharing it? Guess what? It's a blog. It's a web log, right? I mean, that's where the word comes from. It's a written expression of something that's shared on the web. Oddly enough, in my world, more people are interested in the fact that I write blogs than actually read the blogs. Go figure. Another area in which this came up for me over the past week was in the area of exit planning, this area of default. And I asked a business owner what her exit plan is, and she said that she doesn't have one. There is one. If she doesn't have one, that means the exit plan that's in play is the default exit plan, which is I run my business until I die and then I don't run my business anymore, right? Or I run my business until I close the doors and say, I'm not going to run my business anymore. Boom, that's your exit strategy. Guess what? That's an exit strategy. And it's a valid exit strategy. There's nothing wrong with that exit strategy. However, is that the one you want? Maybe it is. Great. Do you want to run this thing until you die and then it's not in existence anymore? If that's what you want because you powerfully choose it, fine. If you're going to run your business for the next 75 quintillion years and then one day decide, I'm not going to run my business anymore, I'll close the doors, fine. That's a valid exit strategy. What I'm advocating is for you to explore whether or not you've powerfully chosen that exit strategy or whether you'd actually prefer a different one. You powerfully choose it, fine. But actually, if you want to sell it in 10 years and make a killing, that's fine too. That's a valid exit strategy. Is it better? No. Is it different? Yes. Powerfully choose it. Especially if you plan to sell it, because then, there's some work to be done to optimize the sale price. So that's my share for today. Examining what hasn't yet been examined. What's worth being examined? Examining your defaults. And even if you don't make a single change in what's being done, powerfully choose instead of having life run you. In best case scenario, you discover that there's a new possibility by making a new choice. So you have something new and fabulous available to you.